Hi, everyone, and welcome in tonight. We appreciate you so much for joining us here at Trusted. My name is Brittany, and I'm the community manager here at Trusted. And for those of you all who don't know, Trusted is a travel nurse company that places nurses in all 50 states. So if you're looking for an assignment, we got you. So tonight we're going to be talking about patient advocacy and pronouns. And we have Declan and Sandra here to just discuss some great information and some great topics. I hope you guys are ready to learn, and we'll get started. Just a couple of housekeeping things. If you check to your right here, we have a chat feature where you guys can just chat with your fellow network and people in there. And then we also have a Q&A section. So if you could just drop your questions in there, I'll float them to Declan and Sandra as the presentation gets to the question and answer. And you also can upvote questions in there. So if you see one of your fellow attendees had a good question, you can just upvote it there, and I'll be sure to make sure I give those to them. We just ask that everyone just be ready to listen and learn and connect with your fellow nurses, as well as get inspired to advocate for our patients. I'm a former travel nurse, so I am super excited about how I can use proper pronouns. So yeah, let's get right into it. First, we are going to talk from the provider perspective, and that's Sandra's portion. She's an FMP. And then as well from the patient perspective, Declan will be sharing about his journey as well. And then we will have 2 question and answer sections, so don't feel like we won't get to your questions. We surely will. All right.
All right, so hello everyone. My name is Sandra, she, her, hers. I am a family nurse practitioner here in Indianapolis. I work at Chatham Care. It is a primary care clinic that also specializes in LGBTQ health. So I have been a family nurse practitioner for just about a year now. My previous experience was in ICU and then PACU surgery recovery before graduating, and then I moved into this role. Just kind of a fun fact about me. My partner and I are growing hops in our front yard. So we just have a little trellis with hops, and we like to brew beer occasionally. I more assist in that process, but just something fun that we like to do.
Hey everybody, Declan Ballou here, he, him, his. I'm one of the operations managers here at Trusted Health. I'm also trans myself. I work in the LGBTQ space here in Akron, Ohio, work with various nonprofits, different healthcare clinics and things like that, advocating for people in the LGBTQ community and doing similar things to what we're diving into today. Interesting fact about me, it's really difficult for me to come up with one. I'm going to be honest. Not that I'm boring, but I'm a dog and cat dad, soon to be real dad too. Hopefully, my wife and I are in the process of doing IUI right now, which is super exciting. So excited to have you all here.
All right, so we're going to kick it off with just some foundations in gender identity, just kind of starting with some basics, and then we'll get to the nitty-gritty of everything. All right, so just starting off with some basic definitions. An ally is someone who is not necessarily a member of the LGBTQ community, but is someone who shows support for people in the LGBTQ community and promotes equality for everyone. Someone who is androgynous is someone who either identifies or presents as neither masculine or feminine. They don't necessarily align one way stronger than the other. And then someone who is cisgender is someone whose gender identity aligns with the sex that they were assigned at birth. So that would be someone who was, say, assigned female at birth, and they also identify as female. And then we have some more definitions.
Yeah, so gender dysphoria, it's a clinically significant distress caused when a person's assigned birth gender is not the same as one with which they identify. It's not always the case for someone who is trans or on the LGBTQ spectrum to have gender dysphoria, but it is very common. Then there's gender expansive, which conveys a wider, more flexible range of gender identity, typically associated beyond or with the binary gender system. So it's like the color spectrum versus black and white. Then there's also gender fluid, which according to the dictionary, it's someone who does not identify with a single fixed gender, or someone who has a fluid or unfixed gender identity. What's really cool is there's actually a lot of mammals in the animal kingdom who are also gender fluid, which is really neat. We also have gender nonconforming. So that's people who don't behave in a way that conforms with the traditional expectations of their gender. There's also gender queer or non-binary. And these are people who typically reject the notions of like typical gender normities. They embrace fluidity of their gender identity, and not always, but sometimes their sexual orientation as well. There's people who identify as gender queer. They may see themselves as both male and female, or neither male or female, and could fall completely outside of those categories. Then there's also, of course, gender transition, which is the process of aligning internal knowledge with your gender identity and your outward appearance. So someone who's going through hormone therapy, that sort of thing. So technically I went through a gender transition at some point in my life to take me from being presenting as female to now male.
And then a few more definitions for you. So queer is a term that's used to express any person with a sexual orientation or gender identity varying outside of traditional society norms. So for here in the US, that would kind of fall outside of being cisgender and heterosexual. Those are kind of what is considered like the main of societal norms. But as we all know, normalcy is relative. Questioning is a term for someone who is in the process of exploring their gender identity or sexual orientation. So someone who's kind of starting to question what they may have previously thought of themselves, or just kind of doing some exploration. So kind of in that in-between stage. And then transgender is an umbrella term for people whose gender identity or gender expression is different from cultural expectations of their sex that is assigned at birth. But it doesn't necessarily imply any specific sexual orientation. So never assume that, just because you know that someone is trans, that you automatically know who they may be attracted to.
So the difference between gender identity versus sexual orientation, gender identity is the innermost concept of someone's self as male, female, a blend, or both or neither. So my gender identity, I'm male. I'm a regular guy. Not all trans people identify one way versus the other, like we've said. And then sexual orientation, like Sandra mentioned, is the emotional or romantic or sexual attraction to other people. So while I'm a trans guy who is attracted to women, I have a partner I'm married to, she's attracted to guys. Not all trans people are attracted to the opposite sex. Some are attracted to the same sex. They are polyamorous. They could be asexual and things like that. So that's basically the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation.
And this is a beautiful visual aid that I always like to use to kind of help people delineate, kind of separating those two, because I know sometimes initially it takes a little bit of time to kind of think through, like, okay, so gender identity is thinking about yourself, and then sexual orientation is how you connect with others. So this is the lovely gender unicorn. I cannot take credit for creating this. I wish I was that creative to come up with this, but it has these lovely color coding to kind of think about it individually. So as Declan mentioned, your gender identity is how you view yourself. So there, if you look at the little rainbow coming out of the top of the unicorn's head, that is someone's gender identity. So that is all stemming from our brain based on, how we perceive cultural norms and how we think of ourselves. And then you have the green, which is kind of like the vavoom outside of the gender unicorn, and that's your gender expression. So everyone expresses their gender in different ways and to different degrees. I think we think of things in a very binary form as either masculine or feminine, but there's all kinds of, kind of levels in between. I always think of, the color spectrum, how, there's like a blue area and a red area, but there's kind of like a purple area in between. And that's where sometimes our gender expression can lie. Some people like to present in an androgynous form. And so in a way that isn't necessarily, strongly masculine or feminine, somewhere kind of in between. And then you can also, as you look down a little bit further with the gender unicorn, you can kind of see the two hearts. And one thing that I think is really important that I'm glad that is included with the gender unicorn is that there's the two hearts, and there's someone that we're physically attracted to and emotionally attracted to, because that can be two totally different things. And, if you kind of think about as you've met people along the way in life, how there may be someone who is attractive from a distance, and then as you get to talk to them, they may not be very nice or very pleasant, and you kind of realize like, I don't think I would necessarily have a connection with you. And those two hearts kind of represent that, how, there are two different parts of how we're attracted to people. And then further down, then you can see the double helix there, and that has to do with the sex assigned at birth. And that is based on genitalia at birth, is how sex is traditionally assigned. And so that is kind of a representation there.
I love that. I'm so used to the gingerbread guy, but I love the two hearts. That's what that does.
Yes.
So we want to open up for questions for you guys. I did want to preface with the fact that, I am completely open and comfortable with who I am. And while not every trans person might be comfortable with someone asking them various questions, this is an opportunity for anybody to ask me anything they want. I won't be offended. I'm just here to educate. So does anyone have any questions for us? No? Okay. I'm leaving. So I want to quickly talk about cultural influences on gender. I actually have a personal story with this. So a lot of people don't think about it, but when it comes to like children's toys, certain phrases that we normally say in roles within family, so many things are culturally tied to gender. Children toys, for example, when I was a little kid, my mom used to buy me makeup, expecting me to, put it up on my face, doll myself up. I instead used to draw tattoos on myself with that makeup. I don't know how my mom didn't find out and realize right then and there that, hey, but it should be okay for kids to play with Barbies and G.I. Joes, regardless of how they identify or what they're born as. Same thing with phrases like act like a lady, the who wears the pants in the family, things like that. We don't realize day to day how those can hurt people within our community, and kind of set that expectation of you should align with one gender versus the other from such an early age. Another term is breadwinner. Like the breadwinner within the family is typically associated with the man in the relationship. But nowadays, anybody can make any amount of money in any job, whether they're a man, woman, pansexual, trans, anything. So, as you're thinking about these phrases and using these phrases, try to rethink and use them differently, especially in a setting where you're caring for a patient, and these things can be heard by people who can really affect them and kind of scare them.
All right. And so of what one that someone's gender identity doesn't necessarily dictate their hobbies, their careers, their abilities. Those are two separate things. And sometimes as we're meeting patients and we're trying to figure out how they identify so we know what pronouns to use, try not to use those as context clues because that doesn't necessarily match up with anyone. I have some patients who are trans women that are in the construction industry, and even after their transition, that they stayed within their same profession, and they didn't, think like, oh, well, now that I've like. thing. No, they're not necessarily assuming like, oh, okay, do you want to play house because the child is assigned female at birth? Like, no, what if the kid wants to go build something? Just do anything. Don't worry about like, oh, well, here, you get this toy, you get this toy. That's silly. Because a lot of times we will feel to kind of please parents as children. And so then we put some of those pressures on kids, then it can kind of create some turmoil, and we want them to have the freedom to choose whatever they want. And one thing kind of related to careers and like stereotypes, there's a wonderful book called The Island of Sea Women by Lisa C. that is fabulous, and kind of relating to how Declan was talking about the breadwinners in this area. It was, I can't remember if it was an island. I think it was an island off of Japan or South Korea. I know those are two very different places. But even this book is about this community that was in the 60s, I believe, where the women were the breadwinners and they did very risky jobs, which, you know, a lot of times whenever you think about jobs that have higher risk of industry, they tend to be male dominated here in the US. But then there was this community where the male partners in the home were staying home and taking care of the kids while the women went off and did these risky jobs. So it was it's a really neat book to kind of help think of like perfect real world example of not necessarily following gender norms. And then one thing to kind of think about is gendering objects. So related to toys, also related to our industry as well. So as I mentioned, I used to be in surgery recovery. So, you know, taking out people's IVs, getting them ready to go home. I always just grabbed whatever Coban was the closest thing I could find. And maybe that's just out of laziness that, you know, the pink's right there and I know my patient identifies as male. I don't care. You're getting pink Coban. So kind of thinking about that, because I remember once I put pink Coban on a male patient and another nurse came by and was like, oh, you don't want that. Like, oh, I don't know why she gave you the pink Coban. And like, I don't see why it was really mattered. I think it's good to just use whatever is handy and to try to get away from like having these like assignments of, you know, this color means this and it has to be used on that patient. So that's something to kind of think about as you're taking care of patients. And I'm sure, you know, with like external catheters, every now and then there's a product that's designed for someone who has what's considered female anatomy, but you can use it on a male patient. So, you know, we're happy to use that if it makes our lives easier. So don't be afraid to do that when it comes to colors of objects as well, and kind of help do some reflection and think about, well, why am I, you know, assuming that I should use this particular color with this person? Because what is the significance behind that color? A little bit of self-reflection can be good when we're thinking about how some objects and activities are gendered in our world. All right. And so kind of some things that I hinted at before is trying to avoid assumptions. So one thing that I remember learning very early on in ICU was another nurse told me a story of how they made an assumption of a visitor and thought that it was the patient's spouse. And then a couple hours later, the patient's spouse arrived. But the way that the guest and the patient were interacting, they assumed. And so kind of threw them off. And so they said, I never make assumptions about who is visiting the patient. So do keep that in mind. And always the phrasing that I like to use is, how do you know? And I use the patient's name. And so today, like I had a patient come in and they brought in a guest with them and I introduced myself and then I said, how do you know such and such? And then they kind of filled it in for me so that you're not making an assumption that someone is married, someone's a parent, you know, let them fill in that blank for you. And then you don't have to worry about having to backpedal with anything that you may have said. And then one thing that I think is very helpful to do to help kind of remind people that, you know, not every couple has a male and a female. And so when asking about a patient's family, I always like to use the terminology spouse instead of husband or wife. Never make an assumption that you know how the patient, what the patient's sexual orientation is, and that you know the gender of their partner. So I always say spouse. So I'll sometimes ask patients. I have some patients that I see where I see both partners, but until I meet both members of the relationship, I'll ask about their spouse sometimes, and I always use that terminology versus husband or wife until you hear them use the terminology, then you can echo it back. But that's always a safe way to go, so that you can let them kind of help guide you as to what to say. So here's like a little example back and forth of different ways to kind of work through asking people about their pronouns. And I know it's always kind of hard to figure out like how to word something. So Declan and I are going to kind of go through some examples here. Okay, so first you'll start off with introducing yourself and include your pronouns.
Am I starting this?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Hi, Sandra. Declan here. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm nurse practitioner in the office.
All right, perfect. And then I always like to, towards the beginning of meeting a patient, ask them about their name preference.
So I see your name is listed as Cassandra. Is there a different name that you prefer to go by?
Perfect. And then if the patient hasn't shared already, then I will just ask them very simply about their pronouns.
What pronouns do you use? This is going to make the world of a difference to anybody that you're acknowledging who typically doesn't get this treatment. So while it may make some regular people uncomfortable, it's going to make the people who matter that much more happy.
And it really does make a difference. I have had some patients where I introduce myself, because this is kind of like my spiel anytime I have a new patient visit and I'm meeting someone new. And I asked a patient, what name do you go by? And it was the same as their legal name. And I said, what pronouns do you use? And they were so excited. They're like, I am so glad you asked. I use they, them pronouns. And it was just like, oh, they were bursting, like ready to tell me. So it is so helpful to give someone that opportunity, so that they don't have to feel like later on in the conversation that they like, do I go ahead and tell you now? Do I correct you? What do I do? If you just kick it off and go from there, then it makes life easier. And, it is nice to figure out what names people go by, because sometimes people with longer names go by shorter names. And so then it just makes them feel more comfortable, because sometimes, they're not used to hearing people call them by what their legal name is.
All right, so I saw some people asking questions about the patient, my personal experience, so it's actually perfect timing, because I am going to go into that. So to give you all a background on what my personal experience is like, I do want to say that everyone's experience is different, and overall, my transition, I've been very lucky and fortunate. From a general standpoint, there have been some uncomfortable situations in the healthcare setting. There's also been some really positive ones. And I also acknowledge the fact that I pass as a regular guy. So my experiences today are so much different than some people within the community that, I hate this term, pass. Not that passing should be a thing, but I do. So, I try to use that my privilege to advocate for those who don't have the same privilege as I do. So I'm really excited about doing this. And please, if you have any more questions, throw them my way. And Britt, just let me know. Now that I'm talking, I'm not going to be looking.
Yeah. So I can go ahead and ask you this one.
Yeah.
How has your experience with the medical community been? Is there anything that healthcare staff could have done better for you in the process of transitioning?
Yeah, so, give you guys a quick history of what I've been through, and then I'll dive in a little deeper. So I started transitioning about 7-8 years ago now. My first experience in healthcare was getting a letter so I could start hormone replacement therapy, and I had to see a therapist for that letter. And all the therapist cared about was charging me for that letter. I saw her maybe 3 times. I expected to continue seeing her. I wasn't seeing her just to go on hormones. And by the 3rd session, she's like, okay, $90, I'll write your letter for you. I wasn't in a place where I could really even afford that. $90 was a lot to me, but I was in a tight spot. I wanted to start hormones, so I paid that money just so I could start hormones. And then when I wanted to start hormones at the time, I was in Akron, Ohio, where I'm at now. I had to drive over an hour away to even seek the proper care. And the doctor that was treating me, he was very closed-mouthed about it. He was in a rural area, had a lot of older patients, was like a family care practitioner. And I found out about him through like this secret group in Facebook. He wasn't advertising that he was treating trans patients. It was, hey, I had a few people who were interested in this. I offered it, but he had no real education on what the side effects were, long-term things. He was basically like, hey, educate yourself. I'm doing this for you, but that's pretty much all I can do. So it was a very alienating experience to me because I didn't feel really supported by the physician at the time. But then, I actually ended up moving to Queens, New York, and I had a completely different experience. I found a community center that was super supportive. They literally had everything. They even had a dentist in their building to treat LGBTQ patients, which was awesome. So I felt super included. I felt seen. I was validated. There were so many people like me there. Everyone was super caring. Everyone in the healthcare community was educating themselves. And since then, honestly, I've had a positive experience. After coming back to Akron, Ohio, things have changed a lot. I've had top surgery since then, which is where it's a double mastectomy. I went to the Cleveland Clinic and the nurses were all incredible. If they weren't sure about something, they were very nice about asking me and saying, hey, are you okay if I asked you a question? There was one point where I said, no, I've had enough for the day. And they understood, they knew they were prying and using me for education purposes, which I was okay with. Like I said, not everyone is always okay with that. But so, since then, I haven't run into any other issues. There was the case where I went to an urgent clinic, probably like an urgent care clinic, probably 2 years ago. And the nurse had no idea what to do after I told her I was trans. She was like, do I need to do something special for you? Is there anything else I should know? But overall, honestly, she was super nice about it. The doctor was kind of weird too. So I think it was more so him than the nurse. But, my best advice to everybody is not everyone is open and as comfortable as I am. So err on the side of caution. I'll get into some points that will help you navigate through that here in a few minutes. But yeah, my experience is super unique. I can't speak for anyone else, but I do advocate for people in the community, work with people in the local healthcare community around here, and just be patient, be understanding, ask questions politely, but don't be overly curious and inappropriate with the questions that you're asking. Engage your room. Sorry will go a long way with people. So, Britt, were there any other questions?
No, I do not believe at this time, but just remember, guys, if you have any questions at all, you can either put them in the Q&A or the general, and I'll float them at the end of this presentation, okay?
So I did want to share some information on some stats for you guys. So overall, there are about 2 million trans people, and then on top of the LGBTQ people in the U.S. alone. 1 in 5 are usually uninsured. 48% typically postpone medical care because they're scared to be treated with how they'll be treated. They can't afford it. 28% of people who do seek treatment end up reporting harassment and being uncomfortable in the environment, and then don't go back to seek that medical care. So with that in mind, a lot of people go untreated, and then it decreases their mental health, everything else. And then 19% of us have been denied medical care. And that's, I believe, the statistics are just from the last 2 years alone. I can probably drop a link to the original article to this. I believe it was a government website. Keep this in mind. While people need to seek care and you're being supportive, some people are scared. So just take it slow with them, be as supportive and affirming as you can. So I know there's a lot of questions. What can you as a nurse do about it to be more supportive? So I've actually put together a few points for everybody. So like we've been saying throughout this, make your affirming presence known. The more you can do to show your support and your supportive presence, the more patients will open up to and feel safe, whether that's you as an individual and you're a travel nurse going from place to place. If you're working in a facility that doesn't outwardly support or show support, make sure you're loud and proud about supporting those patients. And then next, be respectfully curious. So if you're curious, but the question doesn't relate directly to the patient care, be careful how and when you ask that question. If you feel like it's not something you should be asking in the moment, trust your gut, don't ask the question. If they're not open about themselves, don't pry. Keep your questions related to the care itself. You don't want to make any missteps and make someone feel uncomfortable, but if you do, an apology and an acknowledgement goes a long way. And just acknowledge the fact that you need additional education. And then, like we've said throughout the presentation, ask, don't assume. Ask about pronouns, ask about name preference, ask what, if they're comfortable with you even asking questions that are unrelated to their care. And then last, education is critical. The more you can learn on your own and also encourage systematically wherever you're working, the better. Don't treat a patient as an opportunistic learning experience unless they're open to it. As much as you can educate and make an impact for yourself, and then wherever you're going, try to make that impact. Even if you're a travel nurse and you're not staying in that facility for long, figure out what kind of education they're doing. See if you can help figure out what education they should be doing and make an impact. I do this for fun, so I am outwardly offering you guys to get my information and reach out to me, and I'm happy to help. I know that's a big ask, but I'm happy to do it. And that's it. Sandra, is there anything else you wanted to add to this, or does anybody have any questions for us? I'm an open book. This is your chance.
Yeah. I think one thing that can be helpful, like you were mentioning, Declan, was like making a stand and being proud. I know with my badge, I used to have like a little pride flag that was like on the little medical symbol. And so I had that pinned on my badge. And patients did notice it. And it was one of my trans patients that was coming out. They were not having necessarily a gender affirming surgery, but a different surgery that they noticed it. And so I was always quick to take those assignments just to ensure that they got the care that they needed. And one thing that can be hard, I wasn't in surgery recovery for a real long time. So, I didn't know my coworkers as well as I had on a different floor, but everyone was really receptive because there were a couple times where someone would have a hard time remembering what pronouns to use because they would look at the chart, and the chart has to reflect what the license has for insurance reasons. And so they would look at the chart and use those pronouns, but then the person sitting right next to them, we were using different pronouns just a couple minutes before. And so, the nurses that I worked with were wonderful. And I remember once while they were giving a report, I like tapped them. I'm like, him. And I just like whispered their pronoun, and then they were like, ugh. And so like, as they kept giving a report, then they like converted midway through, like, oh, okay, yes. Like I forgot. So it's okay to, help remind each other because sometimes mistakes are made. And like Declan said, you just apologize. Don't apologize for like 5 minutes, just a simple apology, and then keep it moving because they want to move past that period too of the apology. They don't want to feel like, now I feel like I need to make you feel better about you feeling bad. It's just apology, keep it trucking.
I have to add to that. That is so true. It's happened to me where someone's just like, apologize for 5 minutes. I'm like, look, it's okay. Can you not see my face is getting even redder because we're still talking about it?
Yeah.
It happens. We're all human. We all make mistakes. The point is just educate and apologize. And that goes a long way with anybody that understands. Like we know, as a community, we know that this happens. Like you're going to make mistakes. The charts are confusing because it does have people's birth names and assigned gender at birth. And, the healthcare system has a long way to go in making sure those things are easier to access for caregivers. So it happens.
So kind of a segue into this question that we have is I'm curious about birth care. I work in L&D and I want to make sure I help my facilities prepare for birthing persons in the family setting for those who may identify as other. Declan, you mentioned you're using IUI. Who/how and what can we in maternal newborn care do to improve and tailor our care for situations such as yours?
That's a great question. So there's two instances of IUI because I have had trans friends who are trans masculine who have gotten IUI done themselves and they've carried the baby. And that's a very sensitive subject because they're going in to get the care. People look at them weird, that sort of thing. So just be as open and affirming as possible. And in my situation, it's my wife who's doing IUI. But I totally forgot to mention this. But when we first started the process, they were collecting blood work for her, doing DNA tests. And at one point they collected my blood work. And I didn't realize till after the fact, like, wait a second, why do they need to test my DNA? Like, it's in no way biologically going to be my child. We were using a sperm donor. I ended up getting charged for this blood work that I didn't need. And it wasn't covered by my insurance at the time. So like they ended up apologizing. They felt so bad. They're like, oh my God, like we totally forgot. So just in those situations, we work with a clinic who specializes in care for trans patients in the trans community. So they're super open and affirming. But if you have someone coming in and you want to provide them a good experience, you have to be as supportive and open as possible. Ask them questions to make sure they're going to be comfortable with this situation. Make sure your team is educated, like the nurses that are working in the ward, the doctors, everybody, because the more people that are aware that this is a special circumstance, the better, so they can make sure it's a comfortable experience for them. There's no like easy way to try and implement something like that unless your group is supportive as a whole. So if it's like a one-off and it's not something that the maternity group sees a lot, just you as an individual try to be as supportive as possible and educate yourself in that instance. But yeah, it's been an interesting experience for us.
One thing I have learned from a GYN is that she encourages the nurses to try to use the patient's name more. So a lot of times as, someone's getting ready to push, the GYN was saying how a lot of nurses are very supportive and they're like, you can do this, mama, like you got it, mama, and encouraging the patient. And this GYN has made a point to try to encourage nurses to use the patient's name because you don't necessarily know if your patient is non-binary. And so, using words like parent instead of mom, dad, until you kind of know for sure how they identify, and then using the patient's name instead of saying like, you got this, mama, you can say like, you got this, Ginger, like you can do this, so just using someone's name instead can be helpful.
I love that. That's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. Another question for you, Sandra, is I'm starting FNP school this fall with the plan of pursuing a career in LGBTQ plus primary care. What advice do you have for focusing my education towards that career path?
Yeah. So great question. One thing is to keep in mind is that a lot of programs have kind of like towards the end, you do like a big project, a big research project. Be thinking of topics that you could do focused in this area so that you can go ahead and start priming yourself now. There are some great organizations that have a lot of education, a lot of educational opportunities. One is the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. That is a fabulous organization. And you can go ahead and get your membership so you can start learning along the way. That is a great option. Not very many NP schools necessarily have like a specialty track. I'm starting to see some med schools have a specialty track, but it's not super common. Another thing to try to keep an eye out for is using OutCare. It's a website that has like a listserv of all LGBTQ plus friendly providers, looking on there to try to find your clinical rotations. So how I kind of landed into this area is while I was a nurse, I was still in nursing school. Now that I think about it, I knew I wanted to become an NP, but I hadn't even finished undergrad. And I saw there was a conference, a transgender health conference here in Indy. And I thought like, okay, like I don't really know much about that. I feel like I should. And then as I went and learned, I met all kinds of wonderful patients who were willing to share and realized that, this is an area that is, it's an underserved population where there are a lot of providers like Declan was mentioning who aren't familiar with how to do these hormones. And so then I just started learning more and realized like, this is wonderful. Like I want to help, and kind of started diving in. University of California, San Francisco has a set of guidelines on how to do hormone therapy. WPATH, World Professional Association of Transgender Health, has a certification that is pretty extensive. I'm in the process of working on that. It does take like over a year. I thought I could hammer that out in a matter of 6 months, then realized like, oh, nope, they have a timeline, just follow the plan. That is a great resource to learn more as well. Fenway Health has an excellent program as well with a lot of extra learning opportunities, because one thing that you'll encounter with FNP school is learning about PAPs for transmasculine patients can be difficult sometimes because testosterone therapy can affect that. So then you'll kind of start wanting to learn about like dual screening guidelines. And I think Nicole posted a link from a talk that I did last year. And I kind of talked through some things there. And I think at the very end, I went through some resources as well. But please don't hesitate to message me as well. I have my Instagram handle at the very front page. Please, I love questions, so send them my way.
Yeah. Another question we have are there specific diseases or conditions that transgender people are particularly susceptible to relative to the general population?
Sandra, you probably have more information on this technically than I do.
Yeah.
Cool.
I can help with that. So in terms of like communicable diseases, nope, no changes. One thing to keep in mind is that we do see some of the cancer risk fluctuate. So in transmasculine individuals, we see a lower risk of breast cancer because we're bringing those estrogen levels down. And then also having top surgery significantly reduces the risk as well. And then in the reverse for trans feminine patients, the risk of prostate cancer goes down, but then there is a slight increase in the risk of breast cancer. We do lab monitoring to try to keep an eye on different things. So we start out following patients every 3 months, and then it goes to 6 months, and then eventually just once a year, making sure everything is good. With estrogen therapy, one thing that you will probably read about a lot, and also if you work in any surgery-related areas and hear about, is the risk of clotting. We use beta-17 estradiol. That is what guidelines recommend if you're doing oral estradiol, which comes with a slightly lower risk of blood clots than some of the other forms of estrogen, but that is indeed a risk. We don't see those clots happen very often, which is good, but it's something to keep in mind. And then one thing that we have to kind of keep an eye on for transmasculine patients is the risk of polycythemia. So testosterone stimulates the bone marrow, which makes you create more red blood cells. You get too many red blood cells, then the blood becomes more viscous, and again, risk of clots. But we don't see as many problems with polycythemia. So it doesn't happen too often. A really cool thing is that after about 6 weeks of hormone therapy, and especially as you get further along and titrate people's doses, if someone were to take a blood sample from a patient, they would, and didn't see the gender marker on the paperwork, they didn't have that cheat sheet, they would not be able to tell you if someone is cis or trans, which is really cool. So it's like over time, their lab levels go match their cisgender equivalent.
And about 6 weeks into testosterone, your voice starts dropping too.
Yes. It is really fun because I see patients every 3 months. And so it's like the first time I meet them to their 3-month follow-up, it's like, oh, there's a change. So it's very fun.
I have a support group for kids in our area, and it's really cool to see like the kids who have started hormone therapy, like having them come in like a month later and seeing how different they are. Also how happy and proud they are of the changes in themselves and stuff too. So
Yes, yes. Some people are like beaming, like excited to tell you, like, I have this going, like, this is good. One thing I saw over here in the chat with the whiteboards in the rooms, and it is great to put their pronouns there. One thing that I would recommend, I've had one patient have this experience where someone put their legal name and then their chosen name. They put their chosen name in parentheses. Don't do that. I would not recommend doing that, because the way that we use parentheses, sometimes we also do it with like sarcasm. And so
did we lose her?
I think she cut out again. Hold on. Sorry, guys. She came back last time. Hey, Sandra, you cut out a little bit there. I'm so sorry.
Okay. No, not a problem. So, what was the last thing that you were able to catch?
The parentheses.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Yeah. Sarcasm.
Yeah. So we use parentheses a lot of times, like, you do the air quotes with sarcasm. So whenever you're putting someone's name on the board, if you're putting their chosen name up there, just don't put the quotes around it. I would not recommend that, because that can be hurtful to a patient. The point of putting their name up there is so that you can glance up there and remember, okay, yes, I have the right person. So the point isn't for you to do a demonstration of whether you're supportive of them or not.
Awesome. I do not think we have any other questions, unless somebody has some last minute ones that you want to put in the chat there. Any little last tidbits that you guys have?
I think I only have one more. I always have something. But one is, if anyone likes podcasts for your long drives in between assignments or anything like that, there's a podcast called Exclusively Inclusive. It is by a nurse practitioner who specializes in LGBTQ care. And they do a fabulous job of covering different topics. They'll interview different surgeons, like one is Dr. Gallagher, who does gender affirming surgeries, who used to be here in Indianapolis, now is in Miami. And so it's great to kind of see some of the different portions. And they're usually like, I think, a 45-minute episode, but like they're very well done, where they kind of keep you moving so they don't lose you and get like too nitty gritty with the details, but great resource to kind of be able to keep doing things as you learn.
That's awesome.
Do you have a resource list of providers or physician groups that specialize in the LGBTQ plus populations by region?
So I don't by region, but OutCare is a fabulous website that has now expanded, where it's nearly nationwide. And every now and then you'll start to see on some like clinics' websites, they'll sometimes have like a little pride flag. So I know like there's a fertility clinic here in Indy that specializes in the LGBTQ community. And so they have like a little pride flag on their website. So kind of keep eyes out for like good hints like that. So like little pins. I know I have like my little trans flag earrings on today. So little things like that to kind of show support can be good to demonstrate.
Declan, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, just if anyone has any questions that they'd like to continue to ask offline, you can find my Instagram handle here and on the Trusted Health Instagram post. Reach out anytime. Feel free to ask me questions, even if you're just looking for resources or have a specific instance that you'd like to talk about. I'm open ears. Probably won't be the last time you guys see me. So.
Well, we thank you all again for coming, and we appreciate you, Declan and Sandra, for just sharing such a wealth of knowledge. I just want to say, from nurse to nurse, I appreciate you all for being here, just because we are making our healthcare system such a better place by just these little things. I will be linking, when I send the recording out to you all, I will be linking some resources. And then also, Sandra did a previous last year's talk with us. So I will also be linking those resources and things for you all there as well. And so, yeah, we just wanted to thank you guys again, and we hope that you guys have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.